Peter and I are very excited to have you. Looks like Peter is having some issues, but hopefully he'll be able to join us in a minute. So today we are going to talk about the individual object and data privacy in Salesforce. It's a really important topic. Data privacy has definitely become something that is coming up more and more with a lot of new laws. And really, the reason we are talking about this topic is because we've spoken with a lot of customers, and one of the things we find is the challenge is how do you find a specific customer in this sea of information that we are all drowning? So let's go through this. Let me start with the disclaimer. We are not a law firm. This is not legal advice. It's for informational purposes only. We are not Salesforce. We are a Salesforce partner, but this is not Salesforce's perspective. This is specifically our point of view based on what we have seen and heard and read about and the analysis that we have done. So moving on, what we are going to do is start by saying thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time today. Thank you for caring about data privacy. And thank you for being proactive and using Salesforce. It's one of the absolutely best platform I've seen in my life. We are also thankful to some of our customers that have entrusted us with their data privacy initiatives. And should you need to reach out to us or talk with us, the Calendly link here would be nifty. We are also going to paste that link in our posts. So thank you again. So what we are going to cover in terms of agenda is we are going to talk about Salesforce's individual object. We will also talk about how does it address data privacy in Salesforce. We'll talk about how your company can benefit from it. And we'll talk about what's coming next. And then we'll take Q&As. I may be a bit challenged on Q&As because I'm not seeing the stream on my live, but we'll go to YouTube or someplace else and pick your questions. So definitely keep posting your questions. All right, so let's begin by talking about why even bother with data privacy. The reason data privacy and individual object and all of this is relevant is the following. There is a set of privacy laws and a lot of new ones are emerging. GDPR in Europe has been there for about 2 years or more. CCPA just went into enforcement, I think, 1st of July. And the California Attorney General is now enforcing fines. So Javier Bacara is at it. Brazil just went live with LGPD on August 14th of this year. So definitely a few weeks back. PEPEDA in Canada has been around for a while. India is working on its own, which is PDPB. And all of these are, or most of them are cross-border enforcement laws, which means regardless of where you are, if you process data of EU residents, Californians, Brazilians, Canadians, or shortly Indians, you need to comply with these laws. And what that means is these laws give us privacy rights. They give us rights. They give us rights around lawfulness, fairness, and transparency of our private information, of our personal information. And what that means for businesses is that they are now obligated by law to comply with these rights. So if you can ask for your information, which is portability, you can ask organizations to remove your information and they have to comply if they don't have a good legal basis. So a lot of these privacy rights are what we have to think of when we think about implementing these as requirements and complying with these privacy laws. And finally, what this also translates into is consent, is understanding our customers' preferences, asking their permission of how we process that data, how we use it. Can we reach out to them? Can we market to them? Can we do profiling on their information? Can we apply artificial intelligence on it? And behind all of these laws, and I hope this point really resonates with everyone who's been in the Salesforce Ohana, behind all of these laws is the fundamental idea that every brand in the world needs to build trust with its customers, with its followers. And that's what a whole lot of this is about. All the regulators in the world and regulating authorities and a whole lot of intellectuals and privacy professionals are all trying to make sure that when we reach out to people, when we process their information, we are doing so in a manner that is compliant, that is lawful, fair, transparent, and respects their preferences. So with that in mind, let's take a look quickly at how does that translate into for Salesforce and the individual object. So we're going to try and take a master data perspective on this. This is Matt. Matt can be a student. He can be a potential customer for a bank, for a subscription service, for a streaming media service, for a gym, for a healthcare, whatever the business is, right? In a vast majority of those business, Matt's information is captured as a lead. And then if there is enough interest and we follow up, we eventually convert this lead to a contact. Let's say things move forward. Matt is now a customer. We may end up creating Matt as a community user or as an internal user if they're partners or if they get hired as an employee. You then have potentially the same thing for person accounts. So if you are FinServ, insurance, banking, or one of those other, healthcare, one of those other segments where you use person account, essentially the representation and the transition of personal data is very, very similar. Right? Matt can also be a subscriber to our marketing platforms, such as Marketing Cloud, Pardot, Marketo, or something else, right? And eventually, he may also be an e-commerce shopper. Actually, he may have just come through e-commerce directly. And the challenge is when all of these transitions happen, as your customer goes through their journey of their engagement with the organization, how do we make sure that at every point we are able to respect their consent and their communication preferences? How do we make sure that we are not losing this information as it moves through these various phases and maybe across multiple systems? And that is the problem that individual is solving, right? The idea of individual ID is to have a unifying higher level construct above contacts, leads, person accounts, users, and even custom objects if you have them. And basically by doing that, we've really represented individual as an equivalent of the natural person or data subject, as GDPR and some other privacy laws would call it. Individual ID then starts to serve as a federated identifier. And what that means is you can then use it to do customer 360 type of things. Salesforce's customer 360 also leverages this concept. And you may hear the term individual ID or party ID interchangeably. The next thing about this is it allows you to associate a slew of Salesforce data privacy objects. We are going to shortly talk about them. And Salesforce has a very, very comprehensive data model. And so the vision here is that your contact, lead, person account users are connecting up to this higher level record or object called individual. And then the individual is connecting to the whole consent management, communication, and subscription preferences and things like that. Now, one thing to remember about all of this is Salesforce gives you an incredible amount of functionality, very, very comprehensive, amazing set of things. But it's not automatically going to create individual for you. That would require custom functionality, custom logic, custom code, or packages like Cloud Compliance. We are in this business of consent management and individual, and we essentially match your leads, contacts, person accounts, users, all of those, and essentially create an individual or match it to an existing one. Anyway, so let's take a look at individual a little bit more from a technology perspective. Individual really is the linchpin to standard data privacy objects. So this is, the sort of the layout of Salesforce's consent and communication preference objects. And what you see in this right in the middle is the individual object. And, this individual object is then connecting to all of these consent and preferences type things. So there are some things which are really interesting about it. The individual records do not count towards org storage. I personally like to think it's Salesforce's way of, telling its customers how seriously they think about data privacy and to enable all of us to utilize data privacy. If you have, a couple of million leads and a couple of million contacts, you're going to generate a fairly large number of individual records. And the fact that they don't count against your org storage is really incredible. The other thing is individual is an API-only object. What that means is if you go to like the pick list of individual and things like this, you can't really add new values to it. You can add new custom fields to it. So just something to think about when you consider usage of individual object. The third part of this, as I was mentioning earlier, is if you look at this data model, and we'll talk a little bit more onto this, it is very, very comprehensive. So no matter how advanced your use cases, there is a really good chance that this data model would solve them. We've been in this space and looked at this model for the last year and a half, 2 years, spoken to a lot of people, Salesforce product managers, customers, done a lot of investigation and thinking. and re-architected our app to utilize them. And we've not come across a lot of scenarios or any scenarios so far which we could not address, right? It took us a lot of time to get there, about almost a year and a half, just kind of figuring all of this out. But it's a very, very comprehensive data model. So with that, and the other part of this is what you're seeing in here is really a combination of three different type of objects, right? You have a consent-related object, so contact point type, consent, and others. And the idea there is that this is how you can manage consent. When the lead comes in and you have a consent to, I don't know, reach out to them or process their information or whatever consent you're asking. Then Salesforce also gives you subscription objects. And the idea there is that you can maintain, what kind of channel you should reach out to folks on, what purpose are you reaching out to them, how often do you want to reach out to them. And Salesforce now also has authorization objects. And the point of authorization objects is you can have authorization text that you can present to these customers, and you can take their authorization. So very, very robust data model that I think we should all leverage, especially because you're not paying for the org storage. All right, so the next point on this is, how does your company really benefit from it? So the image that you see on the screen really has the individual up top, right? This is Cloud Compliance created this record, but this is standard Salesforce UI, right? So you've got the individual record for Bacillus More, and what you see is that when we ran our processes, we were able to identify that this Bacillus More, this person exists twice. This person exists as a contact and a lead. And by virtue of the email address, that's matching on both of them. And so by taking that information, we have created this individual record. So now whether Bacillus was a lead or is a lead, becomes a contact, or is in both of these because you're tracking on two different set of things, you now have the ability by virtue of individual to have one centralized set of consents, which is an incredibly powerful thing. If you really think about it, this is a very master data management type concept. And what it's driving towards is the single view of customer. Every conversation I have with prospects and customers, every time I tell anyone who asks me, is like, if there is one thing you should do, it's to really consider about starting to create individuals. It's a really good baby step into the broader picture of doing data privacy in a very Salesforce aligned forward-looking way. And also in future, should you choose to go down a customer 360 type path, this lays the foundation for it. The second part of this is it really is allowing you to have a very robust consent management and preferences. And what that really does is it helps you comply with data privacy regulations. Because what Salesforce has done is all of those objects that we were looking at earlier, you can now have very auditable set of consents. Like in our case, we generate opt-in, opt-out, opt-in, opt-out. We create a record for each one of those. So if you have to go tomorrow and prove that you actually took consent, you would know when someone opted in, when they opted out, what channel did they opt in from, what channel did they opt out from, right? So it really helps with your, sort of safeguarding you from risks of lawsuits and fines and things like this, because this is all enabling you to go down a very robust data privacy regulation and compliance path. So let's take a look at how this would work for someone. So, here we have Stephanie, and, she interacts with a business, and it may be that she just goes and fills a Salesforce web to lead form. She may also have come in from a lead gen form that is hosted by Pardot or Marketing Cloud or Marketer or something else, right? So from that marketing tech. One of these two ways is she comes into Salesforce, Salesforce would create a lead. And Cloud Compliance would then look at that and it would create an individual record. This may also happen through an e-commerce website. And what you see with this is like whether it's MarTech or e-commerce, we are slowly getting to the point where Salesforce becomes this sort of central system where you are constantly enriching the information. And as the life cycle of the customer goes through and they interact with various offerings, you have various sites, you have various interaction points, we continue to enrich this data. And we are doing this in a manner that can be very data compliant, data privacy law compliant, right? So as Stephanie now interacts with other systems, she may get provisioned, there may be an ERP that may send her something, an access to something, or, process her order. There's supply chain management, there is business intelligence, there is accounting in general ledger system. So in all of this scenario, because of how robust Salesforce is as a platform and because of its malleability and declarative capabilities, you have a really, really good opportunity to leverage your investments in Salesforce and utilize this as your master system, if you will, for consent management and other data privacy related areas. So this is how you can really leverage a very hub and spoke model type idea. Here is an example of how consents would look. This is this is our user interface at Cloud Compliance. So our customers see this. When you create a contact, and you'd see in this case, this contact has the individual associated with it, the individual record, and all of these consents are coming from that individual. So whether they are for customer support or recall or sales or whatever, and therefore whatever channel. So if you use WhatsApp, WeChat, LinkedIn, whatever it is, you could add as many channels as you like, as many purposes you like. We are very data driven, but we are leveraging all of these Salesforce's standard objects. So this is running off data use purpose and contact point type consent. What you also see is in the system preferences, Salesforce stores these preferences on the individual record. So you have the ability to do that. Again, the beauty of an approach like this is that you are leveraging Salesforce's standard data privacy objects, storage, and it's then more future ready, right? So if Salesforce adds more innovation in this direction, which I'm sure they will, we all get to benefit from it. This becomes easier to integrate with Marketing Cloud and Pardot. A lot of our customers do it. What we do is in our product in Cloud Compliance, we take all of these preferences and consents, and we synchronize them with Marketing Cloud and Pardot and other systems like that. The other thing around this is that you would need, if you're going to go down this direction, you would need to think about how will these processes work. If someone fills a lead gen form on Pardot, how will you automatically create a consent for them, right? So you do need a set of APIs to do this. We have written some in the last year and a half for our customers who integrate through AWS, through Azure, through other proprietary technologies, or some other, different app that they may have, a separate standalone data privacy solution. And the idea is that you're bringing all of this into Salesforce because, that's a very significant piece of capability sitting in your enterprise. And this all then works very, very seamlessly. So what can you do next? What we can do next is that I think for every customer, if you're looking at this, the question you need to ask is assess that privacy risk. What regulations do you need to address? And in one of the upcoming talks, we are going to cover this topic in greater detail. But if you are processing data of Californians, Canadians, Europeans, Brazilians, and potentially Indians very soon, then you are obligated to comply with these laws, and you may need to talk to your legal counsel and figure out which of these apply and how would you want to comply to them. That's the second part, the how, right? The data privacy and a data management plan of how do we address these laws? How do we deal with the data privacy right automation when someone wants their data or they want their data to be removed? How do we manage consent and communication preferences? How do we actually manage this data in terms of data retention, minimization, sandbox data masking, things like that? And we work in all of those areas. Cloud Compliance as a product has capabilities in all of those. And that's one of the things that customers like about us. But whether you do it with us or not, this is something that you should definitely think about. And the third part of this is really act upon it. I've spoken with a lot of customers and far too many of them go, oh yeah, we'll put a checkbox. And no, that's actually not enough, particularly if you are in Europe or Brazil, where the laws are much more stringent than where CCPA is today in California. And that may shortly be changing too. So definitely you want to act, you want to understand how you can leverage the individual object, how you can really leverage your investment in Salesforce and build a solution or implement a solution that's going to be very forward-looking and would scale as these privacy requirements evolve. We are happy to have a conversation should you like to with us. So some additional resources for this, you can go to Plum Cloud Labs blog, and you can see all of these resources that we have. You can see our articles on Pardot and what happens if a lead fills a form, the consent management, which talks about individual. You can definitely also see what we have done some of our white papers and resources for LGPD, for Pardot, our data sheet. Everything is available on our website. You can absolutely get it from there. You can also get this information from App Exchange, which is where we have it. This is a very brief of what we do. We cover personal inventory, data inventory, portability, consent management, anonymization, a self-service portal based on top of communities, retention, preferences, and we are optimized for work.com if you're a work.com customer. And back to our individual, our consent management and communication preferences is based on individual and those consent objects that we are looking at. So we are 100% native, and we leverage a lot of standard objects. A lot of our stuff is also API enabled. With that, what's next is that in the next few weeks, we will pick up a lot of these topics. I would really appreciate if you can put your comments and let us know what's important for you, which of these would be of interest, and then we can continue to go from there. So we want to cover, data rights automation, like deletion, RTBF, and portability, really what options we have in terms of data privacy. Should you buy a standalone product? Should you use Salesforce? What are the factors and considerations? We'll talk about common data privacy requirements for GDPR, CCPA. We'll get deeper into consent and communication preference management, and would love to also talk about LGPD and India's PDPB and the impact it may have on your Salesforce org. So with that, I'm going to switch over and we can take a look at some question and answers that you may have. Very quickly, if you want more information about cloud compliance, you could find us on App Exchange. You could search cloud compliance or put GDPR and we'll show up. And there is a bit.ly link here. We will post this link and some additional information on the various social channels in a bit. You can also reach to me directly at my email address. My name is Saurabh, Saurabh, at plumcloudlabs.com. You can also reach to our Chief Marketing Officer, Peter, who's at peter@plumcloudlabs.com. Unfortunately, we had some technical snafu, so he couldn't join here. So that's, I think, really it. You can also get to us on Twitter. And once again, thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go look up any question and answers that may have come up on various social channels, and then we can address them. Once again, thank you so much for your time. Stay tuned for Q&A. All right, give me just a sec. I am not seeing, unfortunately, the Q&A here. So I'm going to see if I can see things on LinkedIn. Sorry, bear with me just a minute. As you can see, we are a little technically challenged here. Let me go to YouTube, LinkedIn. All right, I don't see any questions here. Let me see if I can find those on. All right, I just see a comment from Steve. You're welcome, Steve. Glad you like it. My apologies. I'm going to see if I can find any more questions on this on YouTube. So I'm not seeing any. Let me see if now I don't see any questions here. So let me quickly add some of the things that I've heard from other folks and the questions that have typically come up on this topic. Some of the questions that I routinely hear from everyone, we're just getting started. Give us a minute. Sorry about that. Need to close a bunch of these things. Yeah. So one of the questions, some of the questions that have always come up is when you think about the individual object and consent and communication preferences, is how do we go about doing it? And I think, as I was mentioning earlier, you probably want to look at it from a data and architecture perspective, right? Where all are your data sources? Where are you going to master customer information? Salesforce makes a lot of sense logically because it is the CRM. It is the system of engagement for a vast majority of customers. But if you have other systems, and particularly true for certain industries such as manufacturing, which may have an ERP, and there is always this ERP versus CRM debate on who's the master for what. And I think it's really important to have that figured out and let that drive. The way Salesforce has designed this, Salesforce can also be a subservient system. So if your quote unquote ID of individual has to live outside of Salesforce, it may be in a separate customer data master, it may be in SAP or something else, wherever it is, Salesforce can be downstream from that. What's important is to make sure, like when it comes into Salesforce, we are integrating it via individual, because then it allows us to leverage the whole consent and communication preference management infrastructure. Another scenario that I have seen with a lot of customers is that they may typically go down the path of buying a standalone data privacy software, or they may go and buy a separate consent management software. And that's fine if you go down that path. Definitely much more expensive, more complexity, more moving parts. But some customers have either already bought it or are buying it for potentially other reasons. And when you're doing things like that, you still want to make sure that when you bring it into Salesforce, you go down the individual route, you synchronize the consent and communication preferences in Salesforce with your consent master. And what that does is, by bringing it all together, you're making sure that your Salesforce and downstream systems from Salesforce, so if you have a MarTech system like Marketing Cloud, Marketo part, or those, they can synchronize, right? So you are at least making sure that your subscription, your outreach is all very respectful of your subscribers' preferences and consent management. So that's the intention of all of this. I know we had some technical issues today, so I apologize for that. I hope you guys found it useful, and we'll do this again. And hopefully by that time, we would have figured these out. Thank you so much, and have a great Saturday. Bye-bye.